Noise is caused when we either stress our sensor or the image we've captured with the sensor. No, I don't mean our camera sensor needs counselling for stress, but it's when we're shooting in low light conditions or we have to use a high ISO setting. Noise is our sensor saying, hang on a minute, you're asking me to perform outside what I'm best at. I'll do my best, but it may not be as good as usual. And if we open an image in an image editor like Lightroom, and then try to push those sliders in the exposure, shadows and blacks areas to raise shadow detail, then we're stressing the image. And noise is the result. Noise is our camera's way of saying, I'm operating outside of normal parameters. But we can easily make things worse, and we often do, by underexposing the shot. If we're in low light conditions, then overexposing highlights is not likely to be a huge problem. So squeeze as much light into the sensor as you can. Now the term for this these days is exposure to the right. Maybe worth Googling at some stage. So we need to try to avoid having to lift detail from dense shadows, but of course I'm talking in a general way, and there's always going to be some exceptions. But again, generally speaking, the first step to combating noise is before we capture the image. Noise is predictable, and therefore our software can handle it without too much impact elsewhere. But here's something to consider. If you're in front of a subject and you've got no choice but to push your ISO up to the maximum to get a shutter speed to grab the shot, it's much better to do that, capture the shot sharp and have a go at dealing with the noise later. If you try to keep your shutter speed low and your ISO low and the shot is blurred, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about that at all. The image you can see on screen was shot with 1600 ISO. And what I'm going to do is just take a look at the metadata here, because if we scroll down we'll see that even at 1600 ISO I only just managed 160th of a second at 5.6, and I'm using a focal length lens at close to 300mm. So let's open this up into the develop module and take a look at it. At this size we can't see a great deal of noise, no major problem. But let's look just a little bit closer. Let me jump to 4:1. And I'll move that little shape down here. We can click and drag that shape, but we can just click in the area we want to look. So let's look into the dark area, and we can see the noise is quite evident. If I click over into this light area, it doesn't look so bad, does it? I'm sure it's much the same, but it doesn't look anywhere near as bad in the light areas, which was part of my point of the preamble. So what do we need to do to fix this? Now I'm going to click the screen to bring this back down to fit on screen once again, and we can go to the Detailed tab. Straight away I feel a little bit constrained by space, so I'm going to do what I normally do here and shut down the panels I don't think I need. And from the top right of the panel I'm going to open up this thumbnail. I'm going to click inside of this thumbnail. It will jump up to an enlarged version. I can click and drag to find an area to look at while I carry out the changes, but I can click here, move over to the picture and click an area I'd like to look at, and it zeroes in on that, and it's a little bit quicker. So I think we'll look at that area there because we've got the bird that we can see and the background as well. Now you may notice I'm still losing the bottom panel, the one we need to get to, off the bottom of the screen here, so just for a moment I'm just going to tuck the histogram away, and there all is revealed. Now of course before I start making changes here I can work exclusively within the thumbnail, or I could click into the picture and work with the image even that size. So why don't we use the best of both worlds, because this is 1:1, but that is going to be 1:4 because that was the last setting I used. Now sometimes I go to the colour. If I bring the colour control down, you'll see how the colour is enhanced, especially in the background. So I'm going to double click to reset that. I'm going to take it to the right, and we see very, very little difference. If I double click, very little difference. I can see a little bit of difference down here. We're getting a little bit of colour change, but not much. Certainly not significant. But it's not giving me much in the way of a change in the image. More so when I go down below the default. On this particular occasion, I don't think that's doing any good for me, and to be brutally honest, in most cases I find that all I need is the luminance slider here. So what I'm going to do here is just move the luminance up a little bit, and if we look at either the thumbnail or the big picture, you'll see how effective the smoothing of the noise is. Generally I try to aim for about 25 or thereabouts, but there's no set amount. You've got to bear in mind the size of the image you're looking at here. You're looking at an enormous enlargement. That's why we've got the best of both worlds with the thumbnail and the large image. But you can see when I double click that even though it's doing its best for the background, which is pretty good, it's not affecting the edge sharpness that much. Because noise is predictable, the software can deal with it. Let's push this a bit higher than I would normally push it. Let's push it up to something like 50. Let me double click while we're looking at the picture, and there's a considerable difference. I don't think we should ever go too far with the luminance, because if we try to take away too much of the noise, we'll just turn the image into a cartoon-like picture, and perhaps we could even use this as a special effect at some stage, but perhaps not this time. So somewhere around 50, I'm going to stay with that, and let's see what the image looks like when we look at it at normal size. So let me give a click to the picture, and there it's looking pretty good. The one option that I could do with right now, and I don't appear to have on screen, is the ability to zoom with a slider. But I know it's there if I want it, so I need to go down to this option and choose Select Toolbar Content. Up it pops, and I can pick the zoom from there. So what I'm going to do is just zoom into the picture, and I think we need to make a decision on whether we've still retained photographic quality or not. And considering that was shot with a 1600 ISO, I think that's pretty darn good. Dealing with noise is similar in some respects to what we've done with sharpening, that it's not rocket science. We can see exactly what we're doing with the image greatly enlarged. So we can take these sliders as far as it's possible to take them, but without going too far, so we get an acceptable result. Here I have enlarged my image up to 2:1, and to save just a bit of time, I've been to every one of these sliders, and apart from the colour, which affects it a little bit when we step it to the left, most of these other sliders, whether I use this at this extreme or that, and the same goes for the detail, the contrast, the detail here and the smoothness, I can see no difference to this image whatsoever. I'm sure if we searched through dozens of images that were high ISO and suffering with noise, perhaps they may have an effect, but I can't find an image to be able to demonstrate them, and most of the time that's where I go to the Luminance Slider. Let me click into the screen to take this back down to 1:1, because the other thing we need to bear in mind, this image is straight out of the camera. No changes have been made to this at all. And of course it's going to benefit from one or two. Let's go to the Basic tab. We have some highlights there in the branch that the parrot is standing on. I'm going to deal with those by stepping my highlights way down. We get an instant good result. I'm going to give this a little bit of clarity. Suddenly we get the wow values start to come up, and we're going to increase the vibrance a little bit, but we've got to be a bit careful because I don't want to increase the blues and greens in the background, because I can't deal with them independently of the bird. Well, not in this way I can't, because they're the same colours or similar. So I've got to be a bit moderate with my vibrance here, and I think that's about as far as I want to go here. And I may even drop the exposure down just a little bit. Let's have a quick look at the histogram, make sure I'm not doing any damage there. Maybe just tweak the whites up to give a little bit more contrast, not too much. There we have it. And suddenly we've got an image that's jumping off the screen. I think we're maybe a little bit too much green now, so I may have to back off with the vibrance just a little bit. But there we have a pretty good result. Maximum ISO, and I think it's been defeated pretty well in Lightroom.